All right, we're going to finish up these brush techniques, acrylic painting techniques, sponge, masking, layering, stenciling, stamping, lifting, brush shapes, splatter, and drips. So got a couple of different brushes ready. Get some paint, water, paper towel, masking tape, and also some stencils, found object stencils, and already made stencils, along with sponges. So get your things ready and let's get ready to roll. Just the camera here. We've completed the top half previously, and so now we're going to move on to the bottom half. And this is something like what your sketchbook page will look like when you're all done. So I've got my palette ready, and I'm starting over here with sponging. Nope, I'm going to start with layering because layering takes a few different passes. So you can use your dropper to get some water into the palette, a little bit more water than your brush would get in. And I'm going to start with, for no reason, red. On top of a pink background doesn't really do a whole lot, but a little wash of red, and then I'm just going to let that sit for a little bit. And move on to masking. This masking tape is a little bit different than the masking tape that you have at your tables. This is made for painters, so it doesn't have the same kind of adhesive on it that would stick solidly. So it'll peel up a little bit easier, but I'd be careful with putting it on just paper. Still, when you remove it, in order to keep from tearing the paper, let the blow dryer pass over it for a minute or so, just kind of blow dry it, so that'll loosen up the adhesive. And you can also use it if you want some straight edges on a shape or a straight line somewhere. If you paint near or around the masking tape, try to paint away from the edge instead of, I'll do it the opposite way here. If I paint toward the tape like this and with a lot of water in the brush, the chance of the tape going, or the paint going underneath the tape, is a little higher than if you use your brush and paint away from the tape, like this. And if you want to use the tape to make some shapes, you can do that. Over here with sponging, you can use the sponge that you have in your brush case. And there's also a couple different types of sponges in the baskets at your table, and each one has a different texture on it. It'll give you a different effect. So rinse out your sponge, squeeze out all the water, and then on your palette, if you dip the sponge into the paint, then also kind of tap it on the palette so that you can get an idea of what the texture is going to look like before you put it on the surface of your painting. And you can get some cool textures that way. You can add a couple different colors onto the sponge. And you can wait for that to dry and even layer it up a little bit. So let me zoom in a little closer for you. You can see all those little textures. So if you put too much paint on your sponge, then you're not going to get the same effect. It'll be very thick So that's why we dab it on the palette first. Splatter and drips. pretty much what they sound like. So if you have very watery paint that's in your palette, one thing you can do if you want the paint to drip is to add that really drippy, watery paint and tilt your paper, pad, board, sketchbook, whatever, so that it allows the paint to purposely drip. You could also load your paintbrush with paint, and it should be more on the watery side because the thick paint doesn't really splatter well. And then if you rest your fingertip on your painting and then bring your brush to hit the finger, you can get some random splatters. Now this is going to spread around the rest of your painting, so if you don't want that happening, then you should find some other kinds of papers to cover it up. And another way some people find success is by using their finger and then flicking the bristles. So you can see how that's very different kinds of splatters. One's very fine and misty and the other one's a lot more drippy. And since I covered up these two areas, the paint didn't splatter in other sections. Anytime you need more time to practice these techniques, pause, do your own painting, and then hit play to come back. The brush shape, we're going to use both the round brush and your fan brush and also a flat brush. With your brush shapes, you're going to allow the brush to do a lot of the work for you. So I've seen students draw out bricks and then take a little, and then they'll ask me for like a little tiny brush so that they can paint in those shapes. And that takes forever. So instead of doing that, allow your paintbrush to do the work for you. Little brush shapes in the shape of whatever the tip of the brush is. And obviously these are little rectangles. I can turn the brush and make larger rectangles or squares. And we can do the same with the round brush. Somebody was doing feathers the other day and asked about feathers. So this would work for feathers, I think. Pressing down and lifting, and you can get some brush shapes that look like that. You can press and then lift the brush as you kind of turn it away. You can try to, let's see, it's a strange fun color. You can press down and turn and then lift up, and that'll give you some really pretty kind of leaf shapes. So with your, I've got the tip of the brush pointing down, pressing down, lifting and turning at the same time. And then I can come back onto the other side, press down, lift, and turn. And you can try that also with the flat brush. Press down, lift, and turn. What other kinds of shapes can you make with your brushes? There's the fan brush also, which if we do what we did up here, just by laying the shape of the brush down, you can get this fan shape. And you can also try pressing down, turning and lifting up. You can use the brush vertically. With a couple different colors. Just kind of play around with all three brushes and see what you can get there. And then if we move over here, back to layering, I can layer a different color on top of this. I can do the same color or a different one.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm recording a video, just FYI. That's fine. They'll deal with it, right guys? You'll deal with it. So by layering those colors, you get like new colors. And in lifting, we can use paper towel or another brush. We'll start with paper towel. Lay down some paint, and while the paint's still wet, you got your crumbled paper towel. Press down and lift up, and you can get some pretty cool textures that way. And you can also use that opposite to do the same thing that we did with sponging. You can also use a brush to lift. So I'm going to rinse out and dry out my flat brush, and then lay down some paint with the round brush. And then use that clean brush to paint through the wet line. So this can sometimes work if you make mistakes too. Let's say like over here, you didn't want that blue on there. You can paint on it with some wet paint, get your paper towel, press down and lift up. Or if you just want some kinds of different textures through a surface. And let me come back here and put another layer on the layering. So this is just like wash and glazing. I'm layering up different layers of glazes or washes. Stencils and stamping. So you can try to find some kinds of found object textures like this, which we could use kind of like the sponge again, pressing down into the palette and then tapping it on the palette in another spot. And that's really great for giving some kinds of patterned textures. You might find something like this, which would work nicely for a pattern, especially if you don't want to, paint 100 different circles. And these also, something like this works really great with spray paint, which we also have. And then you can cut your own stencil. So one of my students, a former student, made this stencil so that they could spray paint some clouds. And with the stencils, just like with the masking tape, you want to like kind of stab on the surface of the stencil and not brush underneath it, because that'll push the paint underneath the stencil. And I also have some different kinds of brushes that work a little bit better with stencils. So if you ask me about those, I can find those for you. Stencils. And then if we come back here to the masking, wait until it's dry, because when you peel off the masking tape and the surface is still wet, you run the risk of also peeling away some of the paper. And also maybe try that blow dryer. So when you peel it up, you've got a negative shape left. And let's see what happened here. This is the one where I brushed under and toward the tape. And this side I brushed away. Let's see what happens. Not a whole lot of difference here. So here you can see some leaked in and underneath the tape, and that one didn't work very well at all. So let me try pressing down on the tape a little bit more firmly here on that side, and then painting. And I'm going to peel it up even though it's still wet. So it's still wet, and that's what happens. It peeled up some of the gesso layer underneath it. So masking is not perfect. I really prefer to use a straight edge if you're going to do something like a line and there's lots of pieces of cardboard over underneath the surfaces sign on the wall for things like this. And now I will stop recording. You know, one more thing, these don't have to be used separately. Like layering, for example, I can go ahead and do some brush shapes on top of that, or on top of the splatters and drips or masking. Try to combine them with each other